The Gorgons explained, the three sisters of terror and tragedy. In the shadowed annals of antiquity, where the line between divinity and monstrosity blurs into myth, there exist tales that have echoed through millennia. They are stories of heroes and gods, of epic quests and unspeakable horrors. But some tales are darker, more complex. They are the chronicles of beings born of primordial chaos, whose very existence is a testament to terror, and whose legacy is steeped in profound tragedy. Welcome, keepers of forgotten lore, to the Eldritch Codex. Today we journey back to the dawn of Hellenic myth, to a desolate island at the edge of the known world. We seek to understand three figures whose names have become synonymous with fear, whose gaze meant a final, silent end. They are more than mere monsters in a hero's tale. They are the Gorgons, the three sisters of terror and tragedy. To truly comprehend their story, we must look past the petrifying visage and the serpentine hair, and into the heart of a saga born of divine cruelty and eternal sorrow. This is their explanation. Before the sun-drenched marble halls of Olympus were raised to the heavens, before the reign of Zeus, with his orderly cosmos and his pantheon of all too human deities, there was the dawn. A time of raw, untamed, and terrifying power. It was an age not of gods of nature, but of gods who were nature itself, in all its sublime and monstrous beauty. This was the world of the protogenoi, the firstborn, and the titans who followed. A world shaped by elemental forces where creation and destruction were two sides of the same eternal coin. It is from this violent, formless, and ancient epic that our story begins. For the beings we seek to understand, the three sisters known as the Gorgons, were not children of the Olympian age. Their lineage does not trace back to the golden throne of Zeus, but plunges deep into the cold, lightless abyss of the primordial sea. To comprehend them, we must first comprehend their genesis. Their parentage is a key, a cipher that unlocks the very essence of their nature. Their father was Phorcys, an ancient god of the sea. But he was not a ruler of the sparkling, sunlit waves frequented by sailors and dolphins. Phorcys was the personification of the sea's hidden dangers, the master of the terrors that lurked beneath the surface. He was the unseen reef that could rip a ship's hull to splinters, the sudden crushing pressure of the deep, the disorienting gloom of the ocean floor. The Greeks called him the Old Man of the Sea, a title that speaks not of gentle wisdom, but of an antiquity so profound it predates mortal understanding. His domain was the fear of the unknown that every mariner carries in their heart. His consort, and the mother of our subjects, was Ceto. If Phorcys was the hidden threat, Ceto was the sea's manifested horror. Her name is the very root from which we derive our modern word cetacean for whales, but to the ancients it was forever linked to sea monsters. Ceto was the divine feminine as a force of monstrous creation. She was the churning whirlpool, the monstrous wave that swallows fleets, the mother of leviathans and all the crawling, tentacled things that dwell in the crushing dark. She was the womb of the abyss, and her children were nightmares given form. The union of Phorcys and Ceto, of the hidden danger and the manifest dread, was not a romance. It was a fundamental congress of cosmic terror. And their progeny was nothing less than a dynasty of dread, a family tree whose branches bore the most fearsome creatures in all of Hellenic myth. Before we speak of the Gorgons, let us meet their siblings, for they are all cut from the same chthonic cloth. There were the Grii, the Grey Ones. Three ancient sisters Dano, Io, and Pimferdau were born old. They lived in a cave in a land of perpetual twilight, and they shared amongst themselves a single, detachable eye and a single tooth. They were the keepers of secrets, oracles of decay, their grotesque nature a symbol of knowledge gained at the cost of all vitality. There was Echidna, the mother of all monsters. A creature of terrifying duality, she was a beautiful nymph from the waist up, but a hideous speckled serpent from the waist down. From her lair deep within the earth, she bore a litany of horrors that would later challenge the greatest heroes of Greece. The 50-headed hound of hell, Cerberus, the 9-headed Lernaean Hydra, the fire-breathing Chimera, and the Sphinx who terrorized Thebes. The Gorgons were sisters to the very matriarch of monstrosity. And there was Ladon, the 100-headed dragon, a serpent so vast its coils were said to encircle the entire world. Each of its 100 heads spoke in a different terrifying voice. Its task was one of guardianship, to protect the sacred golden apples of the Hesperides in a garden at the world's end, a theme of monstrous sentinels that we will see echoed in the Gorgons' own fate. This was the family into which the three Gorgon sisters were born. They were not an anomaly, they were the standard. They were inheritors of a primeval power, a monstrous divinity that the polished, civilized gods of Olympus would later seek to tame, vilify, and ultimately destroy. The earliest poets, like Hesiod in his seminal work, the Theogony, present them without apology or tragic backstory. They are simply what they are. Born monstrous, divine, and terrible. Two of them, the eldest, were born immortal, creatures of pure, undiluted terror. The third, in a detail that plants the first seed of tragedy, was born mortal. Their names have echoed through the ages, whispered in fear. Stheno the eldest. Her name means the mighty or the forceful. She was strength personified, unyielding and ferocious. Euryale the middle sister. Her name means the far-roaming or the wide-leaping, suggesting the vast, untamable expanse of the open sea. And the youngest, the mortal one, the one whose name would eclipse her sisters and become a legend in itself, Medusa. Her name, in a twist of profound irony we will later explore, means the guardian or the protectress. In these ancient tellings, they were born with their most fearsome attributes intact. They possessed brazen claws that could rend flesh from bone, great tusks like those of a wild boar, and powerful golden wings. And of course, their most infamous feature, their hair, a living, writhing nest of venomous serpents. Their very nature was a weapon. The gods, or perhaps fate itself, consigned them to a place fitting their terrible nature. They were exiled to a desolate, storm-racked island named Sarpedon, located at the farthest western edge of the world. It was a place beyond the charted maps of men, near the Oceanus stream that encircled the earth, close to the realm of Nyx, the primordial goddess of night, and the Cimmerians who lived in eternal gloom. Their island was not a home. It was a prison, and they were its wardens. Their existence served a crucial cosmological purpose. They were a boundary marker. They were the living embodiment of a warning sign, signifying to all mortals that here, the ordered, comprehensible world the cosmos ends, and beyond lies only chaos. They were guardians of a liminal threshold that no mortal was meant to cross, and to try was to invite a swift and silent doom. This is the first telling of the tale. A story of primordial monsters, born of a monstrous sea, serving as terrifying sentinels at the end of the world. It is a simple and stark tale of horror. But stories, like rivers, carve new channels through the landscape of time. And centuries later, a Roman poet named Ovid, in his masterwork, The Metamorphoses, would look upon the Gorgons and see not just terror, but tragedy. He dared to ask a different question. What if the monster was not born but made? What if the horror concealed a deep and terrible sorrow? It is this later version, a tale of beauty despoiled, innocence cursed, and justice perverted, that has seized the human imagination and elevated the Gorgons from mere monsters to figures of profound and enduring pathos. To truly explain the Gorgons, we must embrace both versions of their genesis, the one of terror and the one of tragedy. We begin with a story of inherent evil, but we must now turn our gaze toward a story of manufactured monstrosity. To accept the tale of the Gorgons as beings born solely of monstrous stock is to reap but the first, fated draft of their saga. For as the ages turned and humanity's understanding of the gods grew more complex, so too did their myths. A new telling emerged, one whispered not in the chaotic darkness of the beginning, but under the supposedly civilized gaze of the Olympian gods. This version, immortalized by the Roman poet Ovid, does not begin in a lightless abyss, but in the radiant light of mortal beauty. It is a story that argues that some monsters are not born, but meticulously, cruelly, and tragically made. To understand the fall, we must first witness the heights from which they were thrown. Let us cast our minds back to a time before the curse, before the hissing snakes and the petrifying gaze, and behold the three sisters in their splendor. In this telling, the two elder sisters, Theno and Euryale, still retained their divine, immortal nature. They were not yet the horrors they would become, but their essence was still that of the wild, untamable sea from which they were spawned. Theirs was a beauty that was not gentle or comforting, but awesome and intimidating, like a towering storm cloud or a sheer cliff face. First, there was Theno, the eldest, the mighty. Imagine her not with scales and fangs, but as the very embodiment of strength and resolve. Her beauty was in her unshakable presence, a living statue carved from resolve. She was the mountain peak that breaks the wind, the ancient oak whose roots cannot be moved. Her spirit was one of ferocious, unwavering loyalty. To her sisters, she was a shield, a bulwark against the world. Her strength was not a weapon of aggression, but a promise of absolute protection for those she loved. She was the formidable, unyielding heart of the sisterhood. Then came Euryale, the middle sister, the far-roaming. If Theno was the immovable mountain, Euryale was the boundless, untamed ocean. Her name speaks of a wild freedom, a spirit that could not be contained. Her beauty was that of a force of nature, the powerful leap of a great wave, the soaring cry of an eagle across a vast expanse. Her voice, which in later myth would become a legendary, mournful shriek, was then a thing of captivating power, a song of the untamed world. She was the embodiment of a spirit that could never be shackled, a poignant and far-reaching soul. She was the wild, sorrowful freedom of the sisterhood. And then there was the third, the youngest, the mortal one, Medusa, the guardian, the protectress. Unlike her immortal siblings, Medusa, in this version of the myth, was born a human woman. And she was not merely beautiful. She was a miracle of mortal creation. A woman of such breathtaking, transcendent loveliness that tales of her grace were sung across the Hellenic world. Mortals and even gods were set to pause in their endeavors, silenced by the sight of her. Her most celebrated feature, the feature that would become the nexus of her tragedy, was her hair. Before it was a crown of vipers, it was her crowning glory. Imagine a cascade of midnight silk, so lustrous it seemed to steal the starlight, so thick and vibrant it flowed like a living river down her back. Poets of the age would have struggled for metaphors. It was a veil of spun shadow, a river of polished jet, a treasure that outshone any gold. It was said to be the envy, not just of other mortals, but of the goddesses themselves. And this envy, as we shall see, was a dangerous poison. Suitors from every land, princes and heroes, vied for her hand, drawn by the legend of her beauty. They brought gifts of gold and jewels, promised kingdoms and glory, all for a chance to win the heart of the most beautiful woman in the world. But Medusa's heart was not for sale. It was not given to vanity or worldly desire. For all her external beauty, her truest quality was her inner piety. Medusa was a woman of profound faith, and she had dedicated her life, her spirit, and her celebrated beauty to the service of a single deity, Athena, the virgin goddess of wisdom, strategy, and civilization. Medusa was a priestess in Athena's grand temple in the city of Athens. She had willingly taken a sacred vow of celibacy, choosing a life of devotion over one of passion. The temple was her world, her sanctuary, a place of cool, echoing marble, of silent contemplation, and of holy duty. Here her beauty was not a lure for suitors, but an offering to her goddess. Here she was revered for her purity and her unwavering faith. She was Medusa, the guardian, protectress of her own vow and of the sanctity of Athena's holy ground. Picture the three sisters in this time before the shadow fell. Stheno, the unshakable strength, Euryale, the untamed spirit, and Medusa, the sacred mortal beauty. They were a complete and harmonious triad, a family bound by a fierce and profound love, living in a world that, for a brief shining moment, seemed to hold a place for them. But in the cosmos of the Greek myths, a warning is etched into every story. Supreme mortal beauty is never a simple gift. It is a beacon, and in a world ruled by capricious and powerful gods, it is a beacon that does not attract admiration alone. It attracts desire. It attracts jealousy. It attracts danger. Medusa, the devout priestess, living in her sanctuary of white marble, stood upon a gilded precipice, unaware that the gaze of a god had fallen upon her, a gaze that would not be denied, and that would bring her perfect world crashing down into an eternity of horror. The universe of the Greek gods is a treacherous one, for it is governed not by immutable laws of morality but by the volatile passions of divine beings. And in such a universe, exceptional mortal beauty is a candle flame in a hurricane, a thing destined to be extinguished by the very forces that are drawn to its light. The catalyst for the Gorgons' damnation was not an act of their own, but the hubris and lust of one of the most powerful gods in the pantheon. His name was Poseidon, lord of the seas, the earthshaker, brother of Zeus himself. And he was the eternal rival of Athena. Theirs was a history of conflict, most famously over the patronage of the great city of Athens, a contest Athena had won. Now Poseidon, whose gaze swept over the oceans and the lands, cast his eyes upon the most prized priestess of his niece's temple. He saw Medusa, and in her, he saw not a devout servant of a rival, but a prize to be claimed, an act of conquest that would be both a personal gratification and a profound insult to his old adversary. He did not court her with the grace of a lover. The sea god's desire was a tidal wave, relentless and overwhelming. He pursued Medusa, who, faithful to her vows and terrified of the god's raw power, fled from his advances. She ran through the city, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, seeking the one place she believed she would be truly safe, the one place no harm could possibly touch her, the hallowed sanctuary of her goddess, Athena. Her desperate flight ended within the temple's great bronze doors. Her footsteps echoed on the cold marble floors as she ran past the colossal columns, her breath catching in her throat. She threw herself down at the very feet of the towering, chryselephantine statue of Athena, magnificent effigy of ivory and gold, with eyes of impassive sapphire. Here, in the shadow of her divine protectress, Medusa prayed for deliverance, for the sanctity of the temple to be her shield. But a god's lust knows no sanctuary. Poseidon followed her in. The very air grew thick with the scent of salt and ozone. The sacred flames on the braziers flickered and dimmed as he entered. Within the Holy of Holies, upon the cold, unforgiving floor of the goddess of wisdom's own temple, the Lord of the Seas cornered the terrified priestess. What happened next was not an act of passion. It was a brutal act of desecration. He took her by force, an act of supreme divine arrogance. It was a violation not only of a mortal woman, but of the very ground consecrated to his rival. A defilement of faith, of body, and of sacred space, all in one terrible moment. When the horrific act was done, a shattered, weeping Medusa lay before the unblinking, jeweled eyes of Athena's statue. And it was then, in the aftermath of the sacrilege, that the goddess herself appeared, not in a soft light of compassion, but in a blaze of cold, terrifying divine wrath. Athena's sacred space had been profaned. Her authority had been mocked. The vow of virginity that her priesthood represented had been irrevocably broken within her own walls. Her fury was absolute. But where was this fury to be directed? To punish Poseidon, her uncle, a fellow Olympian of unequal power, would be to risk a catastrophic war among the gods, a conflict that could tear the fabric of the cosmos. It was a confrontation she either could not or would not undertake. The perpetrator was untouchable. And so, in a chilling display of divine politics and profound injustice, Athena turned her wrath upon the victim. Why? The poets and philosophers have debated this for millennia. Some say it was born of a bitter jealousy, that the virgin goddess had long been envious of Medusa's magnificent hair, and the desecration was merely a pretext to destroy what she coveted. Others offer a more twisted interpretation, that this was a perverse form of protection, a curse to make Medusa so monstrously ugly that no man or god would ever desire her again, thus preserving her chastity from any future threat. But the most terrifying explanation is the coldest and most logical. In the goddess's unforgiving eyes, the reason for the defilement was irrelevant. A sacred law had been broken. Her temple, a symbol of her purity, had been stained. And Medusa, as the vessel of that profanation, was no longer a blameless victim. She was the living evidence of the stain. She had to be scoured away. The punishment was a horrifying, meticulous deconstruction of everything Medusa had been. The goddess began with the feature that had attracted Poseidon's gaze and her own envy, the glorious hair. With the divine gesture, Medusa's beautiful, silken locks began to writhe and twist as if alive. They thickened, darkened, and coarsened, the strands coiling around one another, sprouting scales and forked tongues. In moments, her crowning glory was a hissing, venomous nest of vipers, a living crown of horror. Her skin, once soft and fair, lost its mortal warmth. It hardened, grew cold, and took on the appearance of impenetrable bronze scales. Her gentle hands, which had tended the holy fires, contorted and grew, the fingers elongating into sharp, brazen claws. From her back, great golden wings sprouted, not the feathered wings of an angel, but the leathery, membranous wings of a monstrous bat, instruments of terror, not of flight to the heavens. Her very form was remade into an abomination. And then came the final, most terrible element of the curse. Athena took the shame, the terror, and the agony in Medusa's soul and weaponized it. She imbued Medusa's eyes with the power born of that horrific moment on the temple floor. From that day forward, any living creature that looked directly upon her face would be turned instantly, irrevocably, to stone. Her beauty, once a source of light and admiration, was now an instrument of absolute, silent death. But Athena's cold vengeance was not yet sated. Medusa's immortal sisters, Stheno and Euryale, hearing her screams of agony and terror, rushed to her side. They did not recoil in horror from her new form. They tried to comfort her, to shield her, to stand with her in her despair. For this act of love, for this display of loyalty to their now disgraced sister, they too were condemned. In Athena's eyes, their solidarity made them accomplices. And so the curse fell upon them as well. Their own divine forms were warped and twisted into the same monstrous image as Medusa's. They too were given the claws, the scales, the wings of terror, and the serpentine hair. The three sisters, one a violated mortal, two her loyal divine siblings, were now united in a shared, monstrous fate. They were cast out from the world of mortals and gods alike. Athena banished them, exiling them to the desolate island at the edge of the world, there to live out their days in infamy, isolation, and misery. The tragedy was complete. Medusa, the innocent, was made a monster. Her sisters, the loyal, were made her eternal keepers in a prison of shared sorrow. And the gods, their cruel, unjust work finished, turned away, leaving three sisters to face an eternity of darkness, their story a chilling monument to the terrible truth that in the face of divine power, mortal innocence is no shield at all. Cast out from the world of light, banished from the memory of men and gods, the three sisters began their new and wretched existence. Their destination was an ending. A place at the final frontier of the known world, an island that would become their prison and their tomb. Sarpedon. A place of jagged black rock, skeletal trees twisted by eternal winds, and shores littered not with seashells, but with silence. Here, under a sky the color of lead, their legend as figures of absolute terror was forged. This island became a graveyard in waiting. Any mariner unfortunate enough to be blown off course, any ship that mistook its grim shores for a safe harbor, met a swift and silent end. But more than that, it became a destination for the arrogant and the foolish. In the centuries that followed, as tales of the snake-haired monster spread, the island became a dark magnet for glory-seeking heroes and kings who wished to prove their valor. They came seeking fame. They found only a final, chilling stillness. The path to the Gorgons' lair was not marked by signs, but by their victims. It was an unsettling and grotesque sculpture garden, a permanent exhibition of hubris. Imagine walking through a landscape populated by statues of men, each one a perfect, petrified record of their last living moment. Here a warrior, his sword arm raised high, his face a mask of disbelief as stone crept up his limbs. There an archer, frozen with his bow half drawn, his eyes wide not with focus, but with the sudden paralyzing terror of meeting Medusa's gaze. A prince, clad in fine armor, now nothing more than a stone effigy, his expression of royal arrogance forever captured. These were the silent stone sentinels of the Gorgons' island, an eternal chorus of warning to all who would dare approach. They were monuments to the power of a curse born from tragedy. The myths, of course, focus on this external terror. They paint the Gorgons as mindless, ravenous beasts killing indiscriminately. But to leave the story there is to ignore the heart of the tragedy. What of the sisters themselves? What was their existence like in this lonely, accursed place? A deeper reading of the myth, a deeper empathy, reveals not a den of monsters, but a fractured, grieving family trapped in an unending cycle of sorrow and rage. Let us consider each sister in this new, terrible reality. Stheno, the mighty, the eldest and most powerful. Her inherent nature, her essence of strength, was now channeled into a burning, protective fury. She became the primary defender, the vengeful sword of the sisterhood. Her rage was not a mindless instinct, it was a focused and righteous anger. The anger of an elder sister who had witnessed an unspeakable injustice against her family and was now powerless to reverse it, but fully capable of punishing the world that had allowed it. Every hero she struck down, every trespasser she tore apart with her brazen claws, was perhaps a surrogate for the god who had wronged them, for the goddess who had cursed them. Her immortal strength was now a fortress of rage built around their shared misery. Euryale, the far-roaming, the wild and free spirit, now became the voice of their shared grief. In the myths, her defining characteristic in this period was her cry, a bellowing, mournful wail that was said to echo for miles across the desolate sea. This was not the shriek of a simple beast. It was a lament of cosmic proportions. A cry for their lost existence. A cry for the beauty that was stolen. A cry for the home they could never return to. But most of all, it was a constant, keening cry for the fate of their mortal sister, Medusa. Euryale's sorrow was as vast and as deep as the ocean that imprisoned them. She was the audible, ever-present soul of their tragedy. And at the very heart of this tableau of rage and grief was Medusa, the guardian. She was mortal. And unlike her sisters, she carried the full weight of memory. She remembered being human. She remembered the feeling of sunlight on her skin, the gentle touch of a summer breeze. She remembered her life as a pious priestess, the scent of incense in Athena's temple, the quiet reverence of her service. Now she was trapped in a body she did not choose, wielding a power she did not want and could not control. Every reflection was a fresh tormented glimpse in a puddle of water, a flash in a piece of polished rock, showing her the monster she had become. The constant, soft hissing of the serpents on her head was an ever-present reminder of her curse. Her power was the source of her profound, absolute isolation. She could never again know a gentle touch. She could never again meet another's gaze without destroying them. The most fundamental act of connection between two beings looking into each other's eyes was for her an act of death. Her name, Guardian, had become the most bitter and painful of ironies. She guarded nothing. She only destroyed. She was a weapon, living in constant fear of her own nature. And so they existed, the three sisters, bound by blood, by love, and by a shared hideous curse. Sthenos' rage, Euryale's grief, and Medusa's shame. They were a self-contained world of suffering. Two immortals forever chained to the fate of their mortal sibling. Forced to watch her live in horror. Knowing that one day she, unlike them, would die. They were no longer three individuals. They had been forged by divine cruelty into a single entity of terror, grief, and rage. They were the Gorgons. Their name, whispered in fear across the Hellenic world, was a promise of a lonely, silent death. But the gods, the architects of this tragedy, were not content to let them remain in their isolated misery. A new thread was being woven into the tapestry of fate. A hero was being born. A hero who would be sent, in a final, cruel twist, on a divine mission to bring their tragic story to a bloody conclusion. In the grand, intricate tapestry woven by the fates, every thread is connected. The story of the Gorgons, isolated in their misery at the edge of the world, was not destined to remain their own. A new thread, spun from divine lineage and mortal ambition, was about to be woven into their dark design, pulling it toward a violent and predetermined conclusion. The end of Medusa's tragic life begins not with the monster, but with the hero, Perseus. Perseus was a child of prophecy, a demigod born under extraordinary circumstances. He was the son of Zeus, king of the gods, and Danae, a mortal princess whom Zeus had visited as a shower of golden rain while she was imprisoned in a bronze chamber. Cast out to sea in a wooden chest by his fearful grandfather, Perseus and his mother were miraculously saved, washing ashore on the island of Seriphos. There, they were taken in by a kind fisherman named Dictys. But Dictys had a brother, Polydectes, who was the king of the island. And King Polydectes was a man of tyrannical ambition and cruel cunning. As years passed, he grew to desire the beautiful Danae for himself. But the young Perseus, now grown into a strong and proud demigod, stood as a protective barrier between the king and his mother. Polydectes knew he could not simply murder the son of Zeus. He needed to remove him through guile. So he devised a plan, a masterful stroke of political theater designed to send Perseus to his certain death. The king announced that he was to be married and demanded that all the nobles of his island bring him lavish gifts, specifically horses. Perseus, a poor fisherman's ward, had no horse to give. In a moment of youthful pride and frustration, he rashly boasted that he could bring the king any gift he desired, even the head of the Gorgon Medusa. This was the moment Polydectes had been waiting for. He seized upon the boy's boast. With feigned magnanimity, he accepted the offer, releasing Perseus from the obligation of providing a horse. He sealed the pact publicly, turning a young man's foolish boast into a sacred, inescapable oath. The king commanded Perseus to bring him the head of the one mortal Gorgon. It was a suicide mission, a fatal errand from which no man had ever returned. Polydectes smiled, believing he had cleverly signed the demigod's death warrant. But Perseus was no ordinary hero. As a son of Zeus, he had powerful family on Mount Olympus, and the gods, for reasons of their own, decided to intervene. Two deities in particular offered their aid, and their involvement deepens the layers of irony and tragedy in our tale to an almost unbearable degree. First came Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods, the patron of travelers and tricksters. He appeared to the young hero, offering guidance. He gifted Perseus his own pair of wondrous winged sandals which would grant him the ability to travel with the speed of thought. And he gave him a weapon of divine craftsmanship, the harp, a sickle-like sword forged from adamantine, a substance so hard it was said to be unbreakable, strong enough to slice through the Gorgon's scaly neck. Second and most significantly was Athena, the goddess of wisdom. The very same deity who had cursed Medusa in a fit of rage and jealousy now appeared before Perseus as a solemn, divine patron. Her involvement is a masterclass in divine hypocrisy. She offered the hero her own shield, the Aegis, its bronze surface polished to a perfect, mirror-like sheen. She instructed him carefully, never look at the Gorgon directly, she warned, but view her only through the reflection in the shield. And that way you will be safe from her petrifying gaze. Why? Why would Athena, the architect of Medusa's suffering, now orchestrate her demise? The motives were as cold and polished as the shield she offered. Was this the final, bitter act of her vengeance, ensuring the complete and total erasure of the priestess who had defiled her temple? Or was it something more pragmatic, more chillingly calculated? Athena knew that even in death, the Gorgon's head would retain its terrible power. By commissioning a hero to slay Medusa, she was not vanquishing a monster for the good of mankind. She was acquiring a weapon. She planned to reclaim the head, a trophy from the tragedy she herself had authored, and affix it to her own shield, turning the face of her victim into a symbol of her own terrifying power. Guided by the gods, Perseus's quest began. But the Gorgon's island was not on any mortal map. To find it, he was told he must first seek out their kin, their other sisters, the Graeae. Here, the theme of a cursed, broken family reemerges with tragic symmetry. The Graeae, the three ancient women who shared a single eye and a single tooth, were the keepers of this secret knowledge. Perseus journeyed to their lightless cave and found them passing the eye from hand to hand. With a trickster's cunning worthy of Hermes, he waited for the moment of exchange and snatched the eye from the air. Blinded and helpless, the Grey One shrieked in terror and desperation. Perseus, holding their only sight hostage, refused to return it until they divulged the secret path to the Gorgon's island. It was a cruel act, a betrayal of one set of sisters that would lead him directly to the doom of another. The Graeae, under duress, told him what he needed to know. They directed him to the Stygian nymphs, mystical beings who would provide him with the final tools for his mission. From these nymphs he received two final, essential gifts. First, a magical wallet, the Cabesus, a special bag that would expand or contract to fit its contents and safely contain the toxic, powerful head after it was severed. Second, and most crucial of all, he received the cap of Hadisa, helm of invisibility, which would allow him to approach his quarry completely unseen. Fully armed, divinely guided, Perseus was ready. He was an instrument of fate, a pawn in a game far older and more tragic than he could possibly comprehend. Wearing the winged sandals cloaked in invisibility and carrying the mirrored shield, he set off across the world. A fated hero flying toward a desolate island to bring a violent end to a life defined by quiet, unending suffering. Guided by the whispers of the gods and the unwilling directions of the Graeae, Perseus arrived at the edge of the world. The air itself grew heavy, thick with a palpable sense of dread and ancient sorrow. The silence here was different, not peaceful, but profound and unnatural, as if all sound had been frightened away. And then, as he descended toward the desolate shore, he saw them. The warnings. The silent, stone sentinels. It was a landscape of frozen horror. An army of the dead, petrified in eternal testament to the Gorgon's curse. He saw warriors from every land, their armor now a seamless part of their stone flesh. Kings with crowns of granite, their faces etched with a final royal disbelief. Young men and old swordsmen and archers all stopped mid-motion, their terror immortalized in rock. Perseus moved through this grim gallery, a living man in a garden of the dead. He understood then that this was not merely a monster's lair, it was a museum of sorrow, a monument to a terrible, lonely power. Donning the cap of Hades, Perseus vanished from sight. A ghost walking through a graveyard of stone. He followed the path of broken statues deeper into the island's heart, toward a dark cave from which a faint foul scent emanated. As he drew closer, he could hear the soft, unsettling hiss of countless snakes, a sound that slithered beneath the drone of the wind. This was the place. This was their lair. Cloaked in invisibility, he slipped into the cavern's mouth. His eyes adjusted to the gloom, and he saw the three sisters. They were asleep, sprawled upon the cold stone floor in a tangled heap of scales, wings, and serpentine hair. Even in their monstrous forms, there was a strange, tragic peace to them in slumber. The vipers on their heads lay dormant, their coils still. For a fleeting moment, they were not the terrors of myth, but simply three sisters, finding what little comfort they could in each other's presence in their shared eternal exile. Stheno and Euryale, the two immortals, slept the deep, untroubled sleep of divine beings. But Medusa, the mortal one, was restless. Her monstrous form tossed and turned, her brow furrowed. Perhaps she was haunted by nightmares, not of the hero she had slain, but of the life she had lost. Nightmares of a sunlit temple, of a beautiful reflection in a pool of water, of a time before the curse. Perseus knew his instructions. Athena had been clear. Only Medusa, the youngest, was mortal and could be killed. He steeled himself, his heart pounding against his ribs. He drew the adamantine harp, its divine edge gleaming faintly in the cavern's gloom. He could not, must not, look upon her directly. He raised Athena's polished shield. It was his window, his only safe view into this moment of destiny. He angled it carefully, and in the dark, distorted bronze, the scene came into focus. A reflection of a reflection. In the shield, he saw her. The sleeping monster. The face that was a weapon. The nest of vipers that was her crown of shame. He saw the abomination he had been sent to destroy. But perhaps for a fleeting human second, he also saw the ghost of the beautiful priestess trapped within the monstrous shell. There was no more time for hesitation. With his eyes fixed firmly on the image in the shield, he moved with the supernatural speed granted by Hermes' sandals. He was a silent, invisible agent of death. He raised the divine sickle high. In one swift, clean, and terrible motion, he brought the blade down. There was no great struggle. Only the sickening, final sound of the adamantine edge slicing through scale and flesh and bone. The head of Medusa was severed from her body. But the story does not end with this brutal, silent execution. The moment of Medusa's death was also a moment of miraculous, impossible creation. From the gaping, bleeding wound of her neck, her final legacy sprang forth, released from the prison of her cursed body. This was the final, bizarre fulfillment of Poseidon's violation. First, bursting forth in a spray of blood and divine light, came Pegasus. The magnificent winged horse, a creature of breathtaking beauty, his coat as white as fresh snow. He was a symbol of freedom, of soaring inspiration, the untainted, beautiful spirit of Medusa finally given flight. And then alongside him emerged Chrysaor, whose name means he of the golden sword. He was not an animal, but a man-a-giant warrior, born fully formed and armed with a golden blade, ready for battle. He was the vengeful aspect of her spirit, her righteous anger given human form. They were her children by the sea god, conceived in violence, gestated in misery, and born from her death. A final, strange, and wondrous birth from an act of supreme tragedy. The commotion, the sudden light, the thunder of Pegasus's wings roused the immortal sisters from their slumber. Stheno and Euryale awoke to an unimaginable nightmare. Their mortal sister, the very center of their tragic world, was gone. Her headless body lay twitching on the cavern floor. An unknown hero, his invisibility now fading as his task was done, was hastily placing her severed, still hissing head into a magical bag. Their reaction was not one of simple, monstrous rage. It was an explosion of pure, soul-shattering grief. Euryale, the sorrowful one, let out a great heart-rending cry, a bellow of pure loss that shook the very foundations of the island and echoed out across the sea. It was the sound of a universe breaking. Stheno, the mighty, the protector, flew into a vengeful fury unlike any she had shown before. Her rage was absolute. The two immortal Gorgons rose into the air, their great wings beating a furious rhythm, their snake hair writhing in a frenzy. They launched themselves after the hero who had murdered their sister. But they could not catch him. Perseus, thrusting his feet into the winged sandals, shot into the sky. He flew from the cave and away from the island, leaving the two immortal sisters behind, shrieking their rage and grief into the uncaring sky. They were left alone with the body of their sister, their vigil of protection now a vigil of eternal mourning. They were immortal and so now was their sorrow. They were doomed to an eternity without the one they had been cursed to protect, forever trapped on their island of stone memories and unending heartbreak. Perseus flew from the island of the dead, leaving behind the echoes of immortal grief. But he did not leave the Gorgons' story behind him. He carried its most potent element with him, carefully contained within the magical cabezus. The head of Medusa. Her death had not ended her power, it had only made it portable. The severed head, with its dead eyes and still writhing snakes, was now an artifact of unimaginable might, a weapon capable of turning armies to stone. The tragic victim had been transformed into the ultimate tool of destruction. On his long journey home, the power of the Gorgon was unleashed. Flying over the coast of Ethiopia, he saw a beautiful princess, Andromeda, chained to a rock as a sacrifice to Cetus, a monstrous sea titan sent to punish her mother's hubris. As the great beast rose from the waves to devour her, Perseus unveiled his terrible prize. He held aloft the head of Medusa, and the mighty sea monster, meeting its gaze, was instantly petrified, a mountain of stone emerging from the churning sea. The curse that had destroyed one woman's life was used to save another's. Later, upon returning to claim Andromeda as his bride, he was ambushed by her former betrothed, Phineus, and his host of followers. Outnumbered and surrounded, Perseus once again called upon the dead Gorgon for aid. "Let all who are my friends turn away their eyes," he cried. He presented the head, and in a silent, sweeping wave of power, Phineus and his 200 warriors were turned to stone, a silent army frozen in poses of aggression. Finally, he returned to the island of Seriphos. He found that the tyrant king Polydectes, believing Perseus to be long dead, had forced his mother Danae to seek sanctuary in a temple to escape his advances. Perseus strode into the king's court, where Polydectes and his nobles sat feasting. The king mocked the hero, scorning his tale and demanding to see the proof of his quest. "I will show you," Perseus said, his voice cold with righteous anger. With a final warning for his friends to look away, he reached into the cabezus and drew forth the head of Medusa one last time. King Polydectes looked up from his throne, his face a mask of arrogant disbelief, which was swiftly frozen for eternity. He and his entire court were instantly transformed into a silent gallery of stone, a fitting and final justice delivered by the power of the woman whose suffering was born of a powerful male's lust. His quest was complete. His mother was safe. His enemies were defeated. Perseus, the fated hero, had fulfilled his destiny. He returned the divine instruments to their owners. The winged sandals and the helm of invisibility were given back to Hermes to be returned to the nymphs. The harp was returned as well. And the head of Medusa, the tragic trophy at the center of it all, he presented to his patron, the goddess Athena. Here, the story comes full, terrible circle. Athena, the architect of the tragedy, accepted the head. In a final act of supreme appropriation, she did not destroy it or hide it away. She mounted it upon the very center of her own breastplate, or in some versions, her shield, the aegis. Medusa's face, her pain, her shame, her curse now became the terrifying emblem of Athena's power. The face of the victim became the weapon of her tormentor, a warning to all who would dare to challenge the wisdom and might of the Olympian goddess. The guardian in death was now forced to guard her own destroyer. And yet, in one of mythology's most profound ironies, the legacy of the Gorgon began to transform. The Gorgonian, the image of the Gorgon head, became one of the most powerful and popular symbols in the ancient world. But it was not a symbol of evil. It became an apotropaic symbol, a charm used to ward off evil and protect the wearer. Her terrifying face, once a source of destruction, was now carved above the doorways of homes to keep evil spirits at bay. It was painted on the shields of warriors to petrify their enemies with fear before a single blow was struck. It was worn as amulets and pendants for personal protection. In death, Medusa had finally, truly, fulfilled the original meaning of her name, the guardian. The protectress. Her image, born of suffering, became a shield for others. In the centuries that have followed, Medusa's story has refused to remain a simple tale of hero versus monster. It has been re-examined, reinterpreted, and reclaimed. She has transcended her monstrous form to become a potent and enduring symbol for those who have been wronged by unjust power, for those who have been silenced and villainized. Modern feminist thinkers see in her the ultimate symbol of female rage. A woman who is brutally punished for being the victim of male violence, whose monstrous transformation is a physical manifestation of her silenced fury and trauma. Her petrifying gaze is seen not as a curse, but as a powerful defensive weapon, a female gaze that turns the objectifying male gaze back on itself, literally stopping predators in their tracks. Her story forces us to confront unsettling questions that resonate to this day. Who is the true monster in this tale? The girl who is cursed to kill with a glance, or the gods who, through their vanity, cruelty, and cold indifference, created her? Is her story a simple cautionary tale about a hero's triumph, or is it a damning indictment of divine, patriarchal injustice? The Gorgons, Theno, Euryale, and Meges are far more than one-dimensional villains from a bygone age. They are a complex and deeply resonant tapestry of terror and tragedy. They represent the untamed power of nature, the unbreakable bonds of sisterhood, and the catastrophic consequences of power without accountability. Their legacy is a reminder that behind every monster of myth, there is often a story of profound suffering, and that the most terrifying things are not always the ones with snakes for hair, but the systems of injustice that create them. They are the eternal echo of a scream, a lament, and a warning, carried on the winds from the dawn of time. The chronicles of the ancient world are not merely stories. They are mirrors. They reflect the timeless struggles of power, justice, and identity, hidden beneath veneers of heroism and horror. The truth, like the Gorgon's lair, is often a place one can only approach through reflection. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of tragedy at the Eldritch Codex. If you believe that the myths of old hold profound and enduring truths, and you wish to explore more of these shadowed corners of lore with us, consider subscribing to our channel and activating the bell for notifications. It is your support that allows us to continue unearthing these forgotten stories. Share your thoughts on the Gorgons in the comments below. Were they victims or villains? What does Medusa's story mean to you? And whose saga from the annals of mythology and folklore should we illuminate next? Until then, remain curious and do not be afraid to gaze into the abyss. For it is there in the darkness that the most profound and illuminating stories are found.